My name is Chris. Welcome, everyone. You're watching live at 6:30 p.m. on Wednesday, August 19th, 2020. And we are proud to welcome you to tonight's program, Ain't I a Woman? Woman of Color and the Right to Vote. And we're happy to have Dr. Naima Johnston Bush with us tonight, and she'll be starting shortly. This program is part of our week-long celebration of the 19th Amendment's 100th birthday. And as you all know, the 19th Amendment granted women the right to vote in the United States. Now, to learn more about our programs and some book lists and special activities, we invite you to visit our website. Our landing page here on this screen here right now is hcplc.org/suffrage. And like I said, there you're going to find lots of information about some of the programs we're doing this week. We have another one tomorrow night, and there's some great book lists there as well. And I'd like to do a quick book shout out. We've selected a couple of ebooks from our Overdrive collection that are themed for this week. One of them is called Fighting Chance by Faye Dudden, and the other is the narrative of Sojourner Truth. Both of these are available through Overdrive. It's one of our ebook collections, and to find out more about our ebook collections, you can go to the website here at hcplc.org/ebooks. And now I'm going to stop talking and let our presenter begin the program. Let me go ahead and turn off my screen and turn off my camera, and I'll turn off my microphone. And welcome, Naima. We're glad to have you here with us this evening. I still don't think we can hear you. Okay, here we go.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes. Yes,
All
welcome.
right, good. Thank you, Chris. Let's jump right in because I have a ton of information that I'd like to cover and a very short amount of time to do it. And I don't know, I think it's about to storm where I live because all of a sudden I'm having connection issues that I wasn't having before. For those of you who I've never met, I've done a lot of work with the Tampa Library, but I'm Dr. Naima Johnston Bush. And Sojourner Truth is one of my heroes. She is definitely given the distinction of being the first African-American woman suffragette. So she is given the distinction of being the first African-American woman who really fought for the right to vote. And a lot of people have heard about Sojourner Truth. Mostly they've heard about her famous speech, Ain't I a Woman? But they don't necessarily know a lot about her. Now, let me tell you a little story because I think it's a great place to start. When I was in college a long time ago at Ohio Wesleyan University, I was a women's studies major and a sociologist major. And I remember in class, I was having a conversation. We were having a conversation about race and gender and what we call intersectionality, or how the two meet, how you are, or how you define who you are based on your gender and your race. So how the two come together to make you you, to make you unique. And someone asked me, who was very active in the women's movement on campus, did I define myself as a woman or as an African American? And I told her that I defined myself as an African American first and as a woman second. And she proceeded to tell me that I couldn't do that, that I had to be a woman first because of my gender. But one of the things I said to her was, I cannot cleave myself in two, because if we get rights for women, I still will struggle because of the color of my skin. So we get rights for women, but I'd still be dealing with a number of issues. And so I can't cleave myself in two. I can't be either or, but if I have to choose, I'll choose African American, because unless we get rid of that, I have problems. So I remember her just really being taken back by that response. But Sojourner Truth was so dynamic that she was invited by the white suffragettes of her time to speak at the 1851 Women's Convention in Akron, Ohio. And it's widely reported that this is what she said. Well, children, where there's so much racket, there must be something out of kilter. I think that twixt the Negroes of the South and the woman at the North, all talking about rights, the white man will be in a fix pretty soon. But what's all this here talking about anyway? That man over there says that women need to be helped into carriages and lifted over dishes and have the best places everywhere. Well, nobody never helped me in no carriage or over no mud puddle or gave me any best place. And ain't I a woman? Look at my arm. I have plowed, I have planted, and gathered into barns, and no man could head me. And ain't I a woman? I could work as much and eat as much as a man when I could get it, and bear the lash as well. And ain't I a woman? I have borne 13 children and seen most all sold off into slavery. And when I cried my mother's grief, none but Jesus heard me. And ain't I a woman? Then they talk about this thing in the head. What's that they call it? The intellect. That's it, honey. What's that got to do with women's rights or Negroes' rights? If my cup won't hold but a pint and yours holds a quart, wouldn't you be mean not to let me have my little half measure full? Then that little man in black over there, he say women can't have as much rights as a man because Christ wasn't a woman. Well, where did Christ come from? From God and a woman. Man didn't have nothing to do with him. And if the first woman God ever made was strong enough to turn the whole world upside down all alone, then these women ought to be able to turn it back and get it right side up again. And now they asking to do it. The men better let them. Obliged to you for hearing me, and now old Sojourner ain't got nothing more to say. Now, this speech was given supposedly in 1851. Sojourner Truth was an ex-slave, and so she spoke in that manner. But the funny thing is, she really didn't. Sojourner Truth's real name was Isabel Pumphrey, and she was a slave who had in fact escaped slavery with her infant daughter. She famously went on to court and sued her former master to recover her son, who had in fact been sold south. And she became the first Black woman to win such a case against a man. So Sojourner was a slave, but she was a slave in New York City, where emancipation had come years before the Southern states, before the Civil War. Furthermore, she only spoke Dutch for the first 9 years of her life. So she spoke with a Dutch American accent, not a Southern dialect. She didn't know a thing about it. She didn't speak in a Southern dialect. As we know, her famous speech is written in that manner. Now, why is that? Well, a lady by the name of Frances Dana Barker Gage is charged with changing the speech 12 years after it was originally written. She embellished it and she changed the dialect. For example, Gage said that Sojourner Truth had 13 children all sold away into slavery, when in truth, she only had 5 children, 1 sold away into slavery, and she recovered him through the legal process. She wrote that Truth was greeted with respect and admiration in Akron, and other eyewitnesses agreed, saying things like, she told a calm story, one where all the faces were beaming with joyous gladness at the session where Truth spoke, and that there was not one discordant note. But later on, Gage said in 1863 that Truth was met with hisses and with catcalls and jeers. Everyone was trying to prevent her from speaking.
I was talking about, I don't know how much you all missed because I was talking for a minute, of course, so please forgive us. Lots of technical issues, of course. But I was talking about how Frances Gage had changed the speech, Sojourner Truth's speech. And what was the reason that she changed the speech? Well, she changed the speech because she wanted to make people more sympathetic to the suffragette and the abolitionist movement. And she thought that by changing the speech into that kind of a dialect and embellishing those facts, people would become much more sympathetic. I don't think that she did it maliciously, but what she did do, what Gage did do, and I'm sure she wasn't aware that she actually did it, was really a disservice to African Americans and to people in general, because once again, the Black woman's voice was silenced. It wasn't what she actually said. What we have today isn't what she actually said. It's what someone thought everyone wanted to hear. This is the same woman who said things like, religion without humanity is very pure human stuff. That's a far cry from a Southern dialect. She said things like, truth is powerful and it always prevails. And that's a far cry from this shuffling old slave language dialect speaking mother wit, as we would call it, that Gage created. So in her effort to give these Black slaves a voice, she actually silenced them by deciding what the narrative should be, because it wasn't strong enough as it was presented. And that is always been an issue. So as the first African American suffragette, when ready for the vote, right? We talked a little bit about this intersection between race and gender. Here, Sojourner Truth is, she's a woman and she's a Black woman and she has to make this choice. And of course, she won't make that choice because she can't make that choice. See, the suffragette movement is originally birthed out of the abolitionist movement. It was a cry and a call for all groups to work together for equality for all. And once slavery is abolished, suffrage becomes more of a hot button issue. And so a lot of the focus, the political focus, the activist focus, all gets put on this hot topic issue. And at first, we have women of color working diligently and side by side with these same women in the same organizations because they had worked together in the abolitionist movement. So we have people like the Fortune family. They're educated and affluent African Americans. They're born in Philadelphia and they're freeborn. And the ladies in this particular family have a history that goes on for years, up until the 50s and 60s, of activism. We have Charlotte. She's the founder of the Philadelphia Female Anti-Slavery Society, and she later becomes active in the suffragette movement. Her daughters, Harriet and Margaretta, worked on the first National Women's Rights Convention. Then we have Angelina Gremke, who some people have heard of, and she actually is related to the Fortune family. She's a feminist, a teacher, a journalist. She attends Wellesley College, and she says, the injustices will end when women get the ballot. And there are a number of women that are unknown, that are just coming to the forefront now. We don't even have time to get into a lot of them, but are coming into the forefront now, who are very active in the suffrage movement. What we wind up seeing is that as these organizations, particularly the ones that are founded by greats like Susan B. Anthony, as Anthony ages and passes away, as this first group of women passes away, and this new leadership begins to rise in response to the suffragette movement, breaks begin to come into fruition because women want to appease the South. White women want to appease the South. And the Black woman's investment in the Black man's right to vote, because if he can't vote, she definitely can't vote, was always a sticking point. You know, it was, are you for the women? Or are you for the men? That was one of the major issues. So differing viewpoints and the need to address racism and violence, particularly when we talk about violence in the polling place and getting the right to vote and getting to the ballot box, all becomes hot button issues. And it gives birth to something that is called the Black Women's Club movement. This starts in the late 19th century and goes into the early 20th century. And the goals of these particular women's clubs, because they're organizations founded for women to get together to advocate for a number of different issues. But their goals were to advocate, to educate, to support, to reform, to fight against racism, to get women the right to vote. And a lot of these organizations are still in existence today. We have the 4 major African American sororities, all founded in the early 1900s, one of which I'm a proud member of. And there's the 1896 National Federation of Afro-American Women, and it merges with the National League of Colored Women to form the National Association of Colored Women. And this is in 1912, and they are so powerful and so active. They have their own department, their whole own department that is dedicated to obtaining the right to vote for women of color and all women. Mary Church Terrell is their first president, and this organization still exists today. And we don't have time to get into the life of Mary Church Terrell, but I would encourage you to look her up. She's one of the first African-American women to get a college degree in the country. She taught Latin. She was friends with Susan B. Anthony. And then we have people like Ida B. Wells, who was an educator, a journalist, and most importantly, an anti-lynching advocate. She wrote a book called, I believe it was called The Red Letter. But she was the founder of Chicago's Alpha Suffrage Club in 1913. We have Delta Sigma Theta sorority. They show up for the 1913 Women's Suffrage March on Washington. And everyone is lined up in alphabetical order, and they are told that they have to march back of the line. But still they march. Still these women don't give up. These women organize. These women do everything they need to do to obtain the vote. So we know in 1920, women are given the general right to vote. At least this extends to women of color on paper. But there are so many other issues that they have to face. The reality is so much different because women of color, like men of color, face violence when they go to the polling place. In 1926, a group of Black women show up in Birmingham, Alabama to vote, and they are beaten by the election officials at the polling place. Jim Crow laws are designed to keep people disenfranchised. And so people of color are showing up at the ballot box and they can't vote because they don't own land, or they have to pass some kind of citizenship test or some kind of literacy test, or just all of these crazy laws and rules that keep them from voting. And once again, it's this intersectionality that comes into play. So we're talking about women of color not able to vote, but the same is true for men of color. In 1876, Native Americans are legally outlawed from becoming citizens. Native Americans. And so they can't vote because they're not citizens. And this goes on until 1948. Dr. Mabel Ping Hu Lee earned her PhD in economics, and she worked mobilizing the Chinese community in New York to support women's suffrage. But because of the Mengenson Act, she's not allowed to be a citizen, and she's not allowed to vote until this act is repealed in 1943. We know it mostly as the Chinese Exclusion Act. So she can't vote, Chinese men can't vote. And then we have, I'm going to probably mispronounce her last name, Dolores Herta, who co-founded the Stockton chapter of the Community Service Organization, which led voter registration drives. She organized farm workers, and she was a founder with Cesar Chavez of the National Farm Workers Association. They understood the importance of the vote, and that was why they worked in voter registration. Because once again, if she can't vote, he definitely can't vote. There's poll tax, Poll tax isn't outlawed until 1964. You have to pay a toll in order to vote. And all of this goes on until we finally see the Voting Rights Act passed in the 60s. And then in 2013, unfortunately, that act is gutted in some ways that have proved detrimental to a number of populations who are attempting, like to vote. What it basically does is takes away the right from the federal oversight and says to the states, you can decide how to identify the people who are allowed to vote. It's estimated that we have 10 to 12 million people who are not able to vote to this day. So the fight continues. We have over 3.2 million American citizens who live in Puerto Rico who cannot vote. They're American citizens. If you live in a territory, you're a United States citizen like Guam or America's Samoa, the U.S. Virgin Islands, and you can't vote. Those are all people of color. That's the interesting thing. We've got 4 million felons who have done their time, and although the laws are slowly changing in that area, they can't vote either. And that's disproportionately people of color. And so the vote, the right to vote, the fight for the right to vote continues to this day. And that was a very brief overview, a lot of information in a little bit of time with just so much to take in. And so when I think, I'm a singer by nature first and foremost, and then an educator. When I think about a song that really kind of brings all of this together, it would be a song by Bob Dylan, and it's The Times They Are Changing. And I'm gonna finish up with that, and then we'll open it up for questions. And so this is The Times They Are Changing, because women of color have always been at the forefront for the battle for equality, and will continue to do so. Young people, and anybody committed, in those areas, but women of color have always been in the forefront. So, come gather around, people, wherever you roam, and admit that the waters around you have grown, and accept that soon you'll be drenched to the bone. And if your time to use was saving, then you better start swimming, or you'll sink like a stone. For the times, they are changing. Come writers and critics, prophesy with your pen, and keep your eyes wide, the chance won't come again. And don't speak too soon, for the wheel's still in spin. And there's no telling who it is naming. For the loser now will later win. The times, they are changing. Come senators, congressmen, please heed the call. Don't stand in the doorway, don't block up the hall. For he that gets hurt will be he who has stalled. The battle outside, it is raging. It'll soon shake your windows and rattle your walls. For the times, they are changing. Come mothers and fathers throughout all the land, and don't criticize what you can't understand. Your sons and your daughters are beyond your command. Your road is rapidly changing. Get out of the new one if you can lend a hand. For the times, they are changing. The line is drawn, the curse has been cast. The slow one now will later be fast, as the present is now and later be past. The order is rapidly fading, and the first one now will later be last. Times, they are changing. For the times, They are changing all the times. They are changing. Any questions?
That was wonderful. Thank you so much, Naima.
For having me.
Yes. Yeah, we'd like to open it up for questions. If anyone here, it looks like we've got some coming in. All right, here we go. Okay, this is in reference to Sojourner Truth. They want to know how was her famous speech captured since she spoke off the cuff?
Originally, many people think that she didn't speak off the cuff, that she had written it down and gave it. But that information is lost to us now. We just have reports of what was said, or people who wrote it down. And I do believe there are a couple of newspapers that may have printed parts of it, but there is no real understanding about how it was captured. We just know that the dialect, basically, linguistically, she could not have spoken that way because she spoke Dutch.
Right.
There's a very distinct accent there.
Right. So we have another question. Someone wants to know, when you were in college, were there more academics available in African American studies or women's studies?
Women's studies. Women's studies. There was, we had a strong women's studies department. I had a wonderful advisor by the name of Dr. Lori Churchill. And I remember after that particular class, she pulled me aside and she said, I would never expect you to make that choice, and one day they'll understand. And that's meant a lot to me. But there were a number of people, there were probably 3 or 4 dedicated. They taught in other areas as well. So they might have been feminist scholars, but they might have been in the sociology department. They might have been in the economics department. Then they pulled everybody together, and that formed the women's studies department. But we had two people who that's all they did. Whereas African American studies, we had one professor, and he did a dual with English, and then they brought in instructors. We didn't have doctorate professors. That was a whole nother issue. I went to a very small liberal arts institution, graduate, and they had a really hard time retaining professional staff of color, academics, because nobody wanted to go there.
All right. Let's see. Another question. Are there any authors or books that you can recommend that cover the African American suffragette history?
There is a new book, and it comes out September 8th. It's called Vanguard. I'm really excited to read it. It's by, the last name is Jones. It's Vanguard, How Black Women Broke Barriers, Won the Vote, and Insisted on Equality for All.
Vanguard.
That's releasing September 8th. And then there's another book, African American Women in the Struggle for the Vote. And the author, the last name is Penn, P-E-N. And that covers from 1850 to 1920. There are a number of books, especially now, with this being the 100-year anniversary. There are a number of new books coming out, and a number of books that have come out in the last year. So I think you'll find quite a bit of information.
Yes. Great. All right, so we have another question here. Let me read this. Someone wants to know, what challenges did Sojourner Truth face as a suffragist?
Well, she was a woman of great faith. So I don't know how much she would have defined as challenges. More so life. This is just life. These are the things that I had to deal with. But definitely, I'm sure she had to deal with some racism, not so much from a number of the early founders like Susan B. Anthony, because she was friends, with them and very active in the abolitionist movement with them and Frederick Douglass. And Susan B. Anthony was a remarkable woman. I didn't speak a lot about her because I'm sure somebody else will, but just really saw across the racial divide, I think, and the gender divide, and worked with anyone and everyone who was committed to making sure that, there was equality for all. I'm sure there was just the regular injustices at that time in New York State. Just because New York State was an emancipated state doesn't mean that, there wasn't racism. There definitely was. So I'm sure, housing, issues with the legal issues with her son, and those type of things. But she always persevered.
Yes. All right. Someone says the song was very beautiful, which I agree. What did the song mean to you the first time you heard it, and has the meaning changed at all?
The first time I heard it, I was a little girl. My dad listened to all kinds of music, and he loved Bob Dylan. And I remember him playing it, but he played a version by, I can't remember who it was. I think it was Richie Havens.
Okay, yeah.
And I remember thinking, well, my first thought was, what does that mean? Because I probably was like 7. But as I got older and I really looked at the words, I think it means something. The thing about that song is that it's so timely whenever, because the times are always changing. There's always an issue at the forefront. There's always something happening in the world that we can apply it to. We can apply it today to the coronavirus, the new norm, and how we're all adjusting and dealing with that. The times are all changing, and it's just a matter of time before we begin to see advocates, for health and wellness coming out of this, pandemic, because of the way they have experienced the pandemic. And so, it's a factual statement that people of color tend to die more than anybody else from coronavirus. And so, we'll probably see advocates, and those advocates will work to change things. So the times are always changing. So I think it speaks to any situation you need it to speak to. And that's what makes it universal and a good song, a legend song, songs like that.
Absolutely. We have time for a couple more questions. I guess I could ask you, are there any other songs that you feel capture that sort of spirit?
Blowing in the Wind, of course, but I don't know that to sing it. Blowing in the Wind. I'm a Bob Dylan fan. And
Yeah, me too.
I'm trying to think. That's a good question. A lot of the Negro spirituals, I'm
Yes.
a scholar. That's my area of expertise. Slave music. I know a lot of people would say We Shall Overcome, but for me, that isn't one for me personally. Because I like songs that paint a picture, and I feel like We Shall Overcome is a statement. It's a song that's a statement. It's a powerful statement. It's a statement that needs to be sung. It's a rallying cry. It would be Lift Every Voice and Sing, which many know as the African American national anthem, but Lift Every Voice and Sing till the heaven ring with the harmonies of liberty. That would be another one. And then there are some songs, today that I can't think of anything offhand. What about the listeners? There's a song from The Greatest Showman. I've been listening to a lot, and I've been listening to the Hamilton soundtrack a lot.
Oh,
yes. Because I feel like a lot of those songs are universal too.
So
I'm all about this song.
me too. Okay, we got one more question, then we'll wrap it up. When you were preparing for tonight, what other topics did you consider that are important to you? Were there others at all?
Yes, but I had to cut. I would have loved to have talked more about what we know is what in the African American community, what we call the Divine Nine, which are the 9 historically African American fraternities and sororities that were founded between 1906 and about 1920. All are still in existence. Our the Democratic nomination vice president is a member of one. Martin Luther King, a number of these Mayor Church Terrell that I named, they were all members of these organizations. And we find that a lot of prominent African Americans today are members of these organizations. And the work that they did in the suffragette movement, the civil rights movement, work they continue to do in terms of voter registration and lobbying. And, it's not just we're going to have a party. The sorority experience was very different from because it was always about service and advocacy. And so I would have liked to have shared, because I think a lot of people don't understand. They don't understand why there's still a need. They say, well, you can join any sorority now. Why would you still need to have historically Black one? My response to that is, just because you let me in now doesn't mean I should have to give up my rich history and tradition. These organizations have very rich history and tradition of service and faith and advocacy. We shouldn't have to give them up. We should learn about them and celebrate them, not look at them necessarily as separatist organizations, but as organizations that celebrate the differences of who we are. And that ultimately is the beauty of America, is that we're not all the same. At least in my opinion, that's the beauty of America. And we should celebrate that. We should recognize the difference and celebrate it.
Absolutely. Well, there's no more questions. There are a couple compliments. One person says great spoken performance, and another person said terrific presentation.
Thank
you. And I agree. It was fantastic. We really appreciate you coming here tonight and sharing your knowledge and your talents. And now I'm going to get back on screen with our slideshow here and just share with the audience. If you'd like to contact our library, you can call this number here, 813-273-3652. Ooh, pardon me, it disappeared. Here we go. Library staff are available to answer the phones 7 days a week from 9 a.m. till 6. You can also go online to our website at hcplc.org/contact. And also to find out about upcoming events like this one, you can go to hcplc.org/events. Of course, Naima's website is here at windsor413.com. You can learn more about what she does and what she knows. Thank you so much for attending tonight, everyone. And again, thank you very much, Dr. Naima Johnston Bush. We appreciate your time. And have a great evening, everyone.
Thank you, Madam.
Good night.